The first thing Tessa Ellery noticed when she pulled her old hatchback into the gravel driveway was the silence. It was the kind that wrapped around your bones and made you feel new again. The tiny cottage by the lake looked like it had been pulled from a forgotten postcard. Ivy curled around the wooden beams. The paint was chipped just enough to be charming. And the lake, just 20 feet from the porch steps, shimmered under the early April sun like it was holding its breath. She stepped out, stretching her arms high above her head. After 5 years of living in the city, drowning in noise and heartbreak, this place felt like oxygen. "Home," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that from the other side of the trees, through the floor-to-ceiling windows of a massive glass house perched just across the lake, someone was watching her. Not in a creepy way. He was still, silent, like he'd seen a ghost. Pierce Thorne set down his coffee without looking away. He hadn't expected anyone to move into the old Ellery cottage. The place had sat empty for almost 10 years. He knew because he'd bought the entire stretch of land around the lake, including the cottage, under a shell company after his first billion. He hadn't planned on anyone living there again. He definitely hadn't planned on a woman who looked like that stepping out of a beat-up car with nothing but a duffel bag and a coffee thermos. She looked soft, not in a delicate way, in a real way, in a way that made his chest tighten. "Who are you?" he muttered to himself, standing near the window. Tessa, meanwhile, was inside, setting down her bag on the creaky floorboards, opening the windows and letting fresh air stream in. Her fingers brushed the old fireplace mantel as she walked by. She didn't know Pierce could see her from across the lake. She didn't know that every time she laughed at the dog-eared book she pulled from a worn box, he was watching with something that felt dangerously close to longing. She was here to start over. That much was clear. After her mom passed, and the breakup with Alan left her reeling, she needed something that didn't come with skyscrapers or high expectations. Her mother's childhood cottage, left to her in a will she hadn't known existed, was the only thing she had left that felt like it belonged to her. By day 3, she'd developed a routine. Morning coffee on the porch, light gardening in the back, even though she didn't know the first thing about planting. She spent her evenings wrapped in a blanket near the fire, reading or sketching in her notebook, something she hadn't done since college. She was finding her rhythm again. Alone, peacefully. Until she walked into town that Friday and everything began to shift. She'd gone to the local grocery store to pick up lemons and bread. The cashier, a kind older woman named Judith, was mid-scan when she said, "You're from the cottage by the lake, aren't you?" Tessa blinked. "Yeah, just moved in," Judith smiled. "You're the first person to live there in years. Surprised Mr. T let anyone near it." "Mr. T?" Tessa asked, grabbing her wallet. Judith leaned in slightly. "Pierce Thorne lives in that glass house across the lake. You'll see him eventually. Everyone does." Tessa's breath caught. "Oh, I didn't realize someone lived there." Judith handed over her change with a wink. "You'll know when you meet him." The next morning, Tessa was yanking out what she thought were weeds when she heard a voice behind her. "You're destroying that lavender." She spun around. There he was, tall, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, standing at the edge of her property like some kind of forest god in a sleek black jacket and jeans that somehow looked expensive. What?" she stammered. He stepped closer, crouching near the plant. "That's lavender." "Not a weed." "Oh," she said, flushed. "Guess I'm not much of a gardener." He looked up at her then, and their eyes met for the first time. Something shifted. "I'm Pierce," he said, standing. "I live across the lake." "Tessa." They shook hands, his grip warm, firm, steady, and it was like the ground tilted beneath her. "I figured you'd come say hi eventually," she said. He smiled faintly. "I don't usually do that." "Why not?" "I like my privacy." "So do I," she said. "But I also like people who save lavender plants." That made him laugh. It was low and rough and did something wild to her stomach. "Want some coffee?" she asked before she could overthink it. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah." "Sure." Inside the cottage, he ducked slightly through the lower doorway. She poured him a cup in the chipped mug her mom used to use. They sat on the porch, two strangers sipping coffee like it was the most normal thing in the world. "You really live in that glass house?" she asked. He nodded. "Built it 4 years ago." "Why here?" He glanced at the lake. "It's quiet. I needed quiet." "You and me both," she said softly. They didn't talk much after that, mostly just drank and watched the water ripple, but something unspoken passed between them. After he left, she stood in the doorway staring at where he'd walked back through the trees. She didn't know it yet, but she'd just cracked open the door to something big, and across the lake, Pierce stood in his kitchen, staring at the mug she'd let him take with him. He couldn't stop thinking about her laugh, her eyes. The way she looked like the kind of warmth he hadn't felt in years. He'd built his empire alone, made his billions before 35, owned companies across 5 countries. But none of that mattered when she looked at him like she didn't care who he was. It had been a long time since someone looked at him like that. And now, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Tessa stepped off the back porch barefoot, the wet grass cool beneath her toes as she wandered toward the water's edge. The early evening air was damp with the scent of pine and lakeweed, and the sky was painted in streaks of burnt rose and indigo. Her hands were still smudged with charcoal from the sketch she'd been working on inside an old rowboat half sunk at the far end of the lake that she'd only just noticed that morning. She didn't hear Pierce approach until a low voice broke the quiet. "You always walk around like that?" She turned, startled. He was standing a few feet away, hands in the pockets of a navy utility jacket, his eyes darker in the fading light. "Like what?" she asked, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Barefoot." "Like the lake belongs to you," she laughed under her breath. "Maybe it does. You've been here 4 years, right? I've got family roots. That has to count for something. You've got a point." She tilted her head, studying him. "You don't seem like the type who shares territory easily." "I don't," he said, "but I'm trying." He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, not physically but like someone who carried too much in silence. The wind stirred between them. "I saw you sketching through the window earlier," he added. "You're good. You were watching me." He didn't flinch. "Not on purpose." A beat passed. "I just noticed things." Tessa crossed her arms, not in defense, but to steady the unexpected flutter in her chest. "I haven't drawn in years," she said. "Didn't think I'd start again." "What changed?" She looked out at the water, watching the light ripple across the surface. "This place, it's strange," she said. "I thought coming here would feel like running away, but it doesn't. It feels like I'm breathing again." Pierce was quiet for a moment. "Then you miss her." Tessa's eyes snapped back to his. "How do you? I saw the letter from the estate office when I passed your porch the first day. I wasn't trying to snoop, just noticed the envelope." Tessa nodded slowly. "My mom grew up here. She never talked much about it, though. I think it hurt her being away from it." "You think she would have come back?" "I don't know. She always said she didn't believe in ghosts, but I think we all carry a few anyway." Pierce looked like he might say something, but instead he turned toward the water. A loon called across the lake, its cry sharp and haunting. "I lost my sister 3 years ago," he said finally. "This place is the only thing that quiets the noise." Tessa's breath caught. "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "She was the only one who knew how to talk me down when things got too loud. After she was gone, I stopped letting people in." Tessa was quiet, letting that settle. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked softly. "Because you don't look at me like I'm made of headlines and bank accounts," he said. "And I don't want to lie to you," she blinked. "Should I know who you are?" He gave a short laugh, dry and almost surprised. "Probably. But I like that you don't." Tessa's heart thudded in her chest. She stepped closer, just enough to see the tension around his mouth ease slightly. "Then don't tell me yet," she said. "Let me keep pretending you're just the guy with the fancy house and a decent eye for lavender." "Deal," he said, and something like a smile ghosted across his face, the first real one she'd seen. That night, Tessa couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, watching the moonlight shift across the ceiling, her thoughts tangled in everything Pierce had said and everything he hadn't. There was a pull between them, quiet and steady like gravity. Not the kind you fall into like a storm, but the kind that builds slowly, until you're not sure how you ever stood apart. The next morning, her porch steps creaked under unfamiliar weight. She opened the door and found a basket sitting neatly on the top step. Inside was a loaf of fresh bread, a jar of what looked like homemade honey, and a folded note. Her name was written in clean, confident handwriting. Thought you might need breakfast, or just something sweet. She stared at the note for a long time before folding it carefully and setting it aside. Then she carried the basket into her kitchen, still barefoot, and let the warmth bloom in her chest. Later that day, she walked into town again. She needed thread and a few buttons for a cardigan she'd found in one of the old trunks. As she waited in line at the mercantile, a tall woman with silver hair and sharp eyes approached her. "You're the Ellery girl," the woman said. Tessa turned. "Yes." "I'm Tessa." The woman studied her like she was deciding what kind of trouble she might bring. "I'm May Thorne, Pierce's aunt." Tessa blinked. "Oh, he doesn't bring people around," May said, "especially not women." "I didn't exactly come by invitation." "Doesn't matter." "You're here now." May leaned in slightly. "He's not easy, but he's worth the effort." "I'm not looking for—" "I didn't say you were," May cut in. "But you should know what you're walking into, that house of his. It's made of glass for a reason." "He likes to see everything, but nothing gets in." Tessa swallowed. "Good to know." May's expression softened, just barely. "You look like someone who doesn't back down." "I guess we'll see," Tessa said. When she got back to the cottage, the sun was already dipping low. She stood on the porch, watching the lake again, the basket from earlier still on her kitchen counter. And across the water, beyond the trees, the lights in Pierce's house flickered on one by one. Not cold, not calculating, just a man behind glass, waiting for someone to look in. Tessa's feet crunched softly over the pine needles as she followed the narrow path leading deeper into the woods behind her cottage. The morning sun filtered through the canopy, casting long stripes of gold across the forest floor. She hadn't planned on walking this far, but something about the quiet rhythm of the trees pulled her forward. She paused near a fallen log, catching her breath and brushing a leaf from her shoulder, when the sound of a branch snapping behind her made her turn. "I was wondering how long it would take you to find this trail." Pierce's voice carried lightly through the trees. He was dressed in a dark flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. He looked like he belonged here, rooted and calm in a way she hadn't expected. "I didn't realize you were following me," she said, half grinning. "I wasn't. I come out here most mornings. You just happened to wander into my route." She gave him a mock suspicious look. "Coincidence? Maybe not," he admitted. "I saw your porch light on. Figured you were up early too." They walked in silence for a few minutes, the trail winding gently between rocks and brambles. A small stream gurgled nearby, and the air smelled of damp earth and moss. "You don't talk much," she said after a while, glancing sideways at him. "I talk when there's something worth saying." "And you think now is—" He stopped walking and turned to face her. "You've been here less than 2 weeks, but somehow you've changed the way this place feels." "I've had 1,000 conversations in this forest with nobody but myself, and right now I'd rather be here with you than anywhere else." She blinked, caught off guard. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. He shifted his weight slightly. "Too much?" "No," she said quickly. "Just not what I expected." He nodded once, and they continued walking. When they broke through the trees into a clearing, the lake shimmered below, framed by the slope of the hillside. A wooden bench sat crookedly near the edge, half buried in wild grass. Pierce gestured toward it. "This used to be my sister's favorite spot. She'd sketch for hours here." Tessa lowered herself onto the bench, fingers grazing the worn wood. "What did she draw?" "People," he said, "but not in the way you'd expect." She captured moments. Like a glance or the way someone twisted their hair when they were nervous. She said it made her feel like she could hold time still. Tessa's gaze dropped to her lap. "That's beautiful." "She would have liked you," he said. "You're quiet, but not because you don't have anything to say." She looked up at him, her voice gentle. You miss her every day, don't you? He didn't answer right away. Then, I do, but it's different now. Before, the grief was like ice. Now it's more like glass. I can still see her in everything, but it doesn't cut the same way. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the tall grass. Tessa pulled her sweater tighter around her. Come on, he said, nudging her shoulder. Let me show you something. They followed a thinner path down the slope, the trees closing in around them again. After a few minutes, they reached a small boathouse tucked into a quiet inlet. Its paint had faded to a pale gray blue and the roof sagged a little, but it still stood solid. I've been fixing it up slowly, Pierce said as he pushed open the door. It was my dad's. He used to take us out in the boat before everything got complicated. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and varnish. An old rowboat rested on a cradle in the center, half sanded and stripped of its original paint. Tools hung neatly on the far wall and a vintage radio crackled softly from a shelf. You did all this? She asked, running her hand along the smooth edge of the boat. It helps me think, he said. And it's the only place where I don't feel like I have to be someone else. Tessa turned to him slowly. Who do people expect you to be? The version of me they read about, he said. The man who closes billion-dollar deals, the one who never makes mistakes, but that's not who I am. Not really. She studied him for a long moment. So who are you? I'm someone who's tired of pretending. The words hung between them, heavy and raw. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, there's a gala in the city next weekend. One of those black tie charity things I can't avoid. And you're telling me because I don't want to go alone, she raised an eyebrow. You don't exactly strike me as someone who needs a date. I don't, he said evenly, but I want one, I want you. Tessa's breath hitched. Her hands tightened slightly around the strap of her bag. I don't have anything to wear to something like that, she said, not quite meeting his eyes. I'll take care of that, he said simply. And what if I say yes and it's a disaster? Then we'll leave early and stop for burgers on the way home. She laughed, then a real, surprised laugh, and something in him eased. All right, she said. I'll go. He exhaled quietly, a rare softness passing over his face. He didn't reach for her, didn't try to push the moment further. He just stood there, quietly pleased, as if her yes meant more than he could say. They walked back to the cottage together, the sun trailing behind them through the trees. When they reached her porch, he paused at the bottom step and looked up at her. I'll pick you up Friday, he said. Don't be late, she replied. I'm never late. She watched him walk away, his silhouette framed by the warm twilight. Inside, she leaned against the door, heart racing. Somewhere between the lavender and the boat and the clearing in the woods, something had shifted. And for the first time in a long time, Tessa wasn't afraid of what came next. The city skyline glittered like a crown of light as Pierce's car pulled up outside the ballroom. Tessa stepped out cautiously, heels clicking against the marble, her breath catching as she took in the towering glass building and the row of photographers beyond the velvet ropes. The driver took the car without a word, and Pierce extended his hand. I thought you said small charity gala, she said under her breath, glancing at the red carpet unfurling into the lobby. I never said small, he replied. Her gown, midnight blue, with delicate beading that caught every glint of light, had arrived in a white box earlier that day, along with a simple pair of heels and a note that only said, just be yourself. She hadn't asked how he knew her size. Inside, the ballroom was a sea of elegance. Chandeliers sparkled above tables covered in crystal and silver. Music drifted from a string quartet in the corner, and the air buzzed with the sound of clinking glasses and murmured names of people she'd only ever seen on magazine covers. Pierce rested a hand lightly on the small of her back. You okay? I've never seen this much glassware in one room, she whispered. I'm afraid to breathe near it. You'll be fine. Just don't let anyone hand you caviar. Noted. They moved through the crowd, heads turning as they passed. Tessa noticed the way people looked at him, quick glances, subtle nods, the way conversations shifted when he approached. But Pierce didn't seem interested in any of it. His attention never strayed from her for long. A man in a tailored tuxedo approached them near the bar. "Pierce Thorne," he said, holding out his hand. "I was starting to think you'd gone feral in that lake house of yours." Pierce shook his hand but didn't smile. "Still feral, just better dressed." The man turned to Tessa. "And you must be the reason he looks human again." "Tessa Ellery," she said politely, gripping her clutch tighter. "Chase Donovan," he replied. "We used to work together. Back when Pierce still thought the world could be fixed with a better algorithm." "Now I just hide in the woods," Pierce said. Chase's eyes flicked between them. "Well, you've certainly upgraded your company." He tipped his glass in her direction and melted back into the crowd. Tessa leaned toward Pierce. "Is it always like this?" "Worse, usually." "But you make it tolerable." They found their table near the edge of the dance floor, tucked just far enough from the center to feel like a quiet escape. Tessa picked at her salad, eyes scanning the crowd. "You've never told me what you actually do," she said suddenly. Pierce set down his water. "You never asked." "I'm asking now." He watched her for a moment, then leaned forward slightly. "I built a company that uses behavioral data to predict market shifts. Started in a studio apartment with a laptop and a lot of caffeine. Sold my first platform at 28. Now I own a portfolio of companies in tech, logistics, and clean energy." She blinked. "So you're not just rich, you're like Forbes' list, own your own island kind of rich." "That's not how I define myself." "How do you define yourself then?" He didn't answer right away. "I used to think success was about control. Now I think it's about peace. I'm still figuring it out." A server refilled their glasses. On stage, a woman began a speech about the foundation's work in education reform. Pierce watched her for a moment, then turned back to Tessa. "I didn't bring you here to impress you," he said. "I brought you because I wanted you to see the parts of my life I usually keep locked away." "I'm not a key," she said softly. "I'm not here to unlock anything for you, I know. That's why I trust you." Later, as the music shifted into something slower, couples began drifting onto the dance floor. Pierce stood and extended his hand. "Dance with me." "I'm not exactly ballroom trained." "Neither am I." She took his hand and he led her into the soft circle of light. He settled one hand on her waist, the other clasping hers, and they began to move. It was slow, steady, and far less terrifying than she expected. "You're not bad," she admitted quietly. "I'm motivated." She looked up at him then, really looked. His jaw was tense, but his eyes were soft, and for the first time she saw something unguarded there. Not just attraction, but fear, hope, longing. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you made everything quiet the second you stepped out of that car." Their steps slowed until they were almost still. The music folded around them and the rest of the room faded. "I'm falling for you," he said. She didn't speak. The words were too big, too fast, but they didn't scare her. Not the way they would have before, not the way they would have with anyone else. They left the gala before dessert, Pierce's hand warm on her knee during the ride home. He didn't say anything else, and neither did she. The silence felt full, not empty. When they reached the lake, the moon hung low over the water. He walked her to the porch, stopping at the bottom step like always. "Come up," she said, her voice quiet. He did. Inside, she poured them both tea, and they sat on the couch with their knees touching. She reached into the drawer of the side table and pulled out a small, battered photo. "My mom." "On this porch, I found it in the attic," she said. She looked happy here, like she belonged. Pierce took the photo, his thumb brushing the corner. "You look like her." "I want to stay," she said suddenly. "Not just in the cottage, I mean here, with you." He set the photo down carefully. "Then stay." "I don't want to be something temporary." "You're not." A beat passed. Then he stood, walked to the door, and stepped outside. She followed, heart pounding. He took something from his coat pocket, a small velvet box. "I wasn't planning this tonight," he said. "But nothing about you has gone to plan, and I don't want to wait." Her breath caught. He opened the box. Inside was a delicate gold ring, simple and stunning. No over-the-top diamond, just a single band with a sapphire, deep and blue like the lake. "Marry me." Tessa stared at him, the world tilting just slightly. "I know it's fast," he said. "But I've built empires chasing the wrong things. I don't want to waste another day not building something that actually matters." She reached for the ring, her fingers trembling slightly. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you," he exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. The next morning, the lake was calm. The mist curled low across the surface and birds called lazily from the trees. Inside the cottage, Tessa stood barefoot in his oversized shirt, watching Pierce brew coffee in her kitchen like he'd been doing it forever. There was no ceremony, no pretense, just quiet and warmth and something that felt like home. "You're really not going back to the city?" she asked. "Not unless you come with me," she smiled. "Then I guess we stay here." He crossed the room and touched her cheek, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I never wanted a glass house," he said. "I just didn't know what it felt like to be warm." She leaned into him, pressing her lips to his. It was soft, sure, and final in the best way. Outside, the lake shimmered. And this time, when she looked across the water, she didn't see the man behind the glass. She saw the man who had finally stepped through it. The water lapped gently against the dock as Tessa dipped her toes into the lake, her engagement ring catching the late morning sun. The cottage behind her was quiet, save for the low hum of the kettle inside. Pierce had gone to town to speak with the county clerk about the property lines. He wanted to officially transfer the deed for the lands surrounding the cottage to include her name. She hadn't asked him to. He hadn't asked if she wanted it. He had simply said, "You should own the place that brought you back to life." The thought made her chest tighten in that strange, beautiful way that only happened when her heart was too full. A soft rustle behind her pulled her from her reverie. She didn't need to turn around to know it was May Thorne. The older woman stepped onto the dock with a tin of lemon biscuits tucked under her arm and a wary look in her eyes. "Thought I'd find you out here," May said, settling beside her on the edge of the wood. "Pierce used to sit right here after his sister's funeral, didn't say a word for hours." "I didn't know he still spoke to you," Tessa replied. "He doesn't, not much, but I keep track." May handed her the tin. "You'll need these." "Planning a wedding means you'll forget to eat." Tessa glanced at her, surprised. "You approve?" "I didn't say that." May pulled out a biscuit for herself. "But I've seen my nephew walk through life like he's made of stone. Now he looks like flesh again." Tessa bit into one of the cookies. "He's not easy. I raised him for a time after his parents passed. That boy held the weight of the world before he knew how to tie his shoes." May's voice softened. "But you anchor him." "I don't want to be the reason he's okay. I want to be with him because he already is." May nodded. "Then you'll do fine." As the older woman stood to leave, she added, "You make sure he doesn't turn that glass house back into a fortress." "I will." That evening, Tessa stood barefoot in the living room of the glass house, her arms wrapped around herself as she looked out at the lake. The house no longer felt cold or echoing. Pierce had filled it with small, deliberate changes. A woven throw draped across the back of the couch. A photograph of her and him at the boathouse, her hair tangled in the wind, both of them laughing. A ceramic mug she'd made in college, now sitting on his kitchen counter. "You're quiet," Pierce said as he entered from the hallway, rolling up the sleeves of his shirt. "So are you." She turned to him. "Did everything go through with the land deed, signed and sealed?" "You're officially the co-owner of the Ellery cottage and the surrounding property." She stepped into his arms. "I still can't believe you did that." "I didn't do it for gratitude." He kissed her forehead. "I did it because I want you to feel unmovable, like this place belongs to you as much as it ever did to your mother." She rested her chin on his chest. "We'll need to tell Judith, and that guy from the general store who keeps calling me the lake girl." Pierce grinned. "They'll probably throw us a parade." "I'd settle for a potluck." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. "Speaking of announcements, got this in the mail today." She opened it and read the letter inside. It was from the foundation hosting the gala, offering her a part-time position helping curate local art showcases for their youth programs. "I didn't apply for this," she said, stunned. "You didn't have to. They saw your sketches in the charity program." "I may have slipped one in when no one was looking." She stared at him. "You didn't." "I did." You can't just go around submitting my art without my permission. I can if it means people finally see what I've known since the moment you picked up a pencil. Tessa swatted him with the envelope, but her smile betrayed her. I love you, she said, the words coming easier than she expected. He held her tighter. Then marry me tomorrow. Tomorrow, I already spoke to the officiant. May's agreed to sign as witness. It'll be small, just us, the lake, and the people who matter. She blinked. What about the dress, the guests, the cake? I ordered your favorite lemon vanilla from the bakery in town. Judith's bringing wildflowers, and your dress is already hanging in the upstairs closet. Tessa pulled back, eyes narrowing. You had a wedding dress delivered to your house without telling me. I had 3 cents. You can choose. She laughed, pressing her forehead to his. You're impossible. I'm yours. The next day, the sky was a flawless stretch of blue. They stood on the dock, barefoot, hand in hand, as the officiant read the vows Pierce had written himself. Tessa's dress was simple, lace-trimmed, the bodice fitted and the skirt trailing just past her knees. Her hair was down, curling softly at her shoulders. Pierce wore a white linen shirt rolled to his elbows and dark slacks. A single blue ribbon was tied around his wrist, the same shade as the lake. Her idea. May stood at the edge of the dock, holding a bouquet of wildflowers and blinking suspiciously more than usual. Judith took photographs with a vintage camera she insisted still worked better than anything digital. Even Chase Donovan had shown up, uninvited but with a bottle of champagne and a surprisingly heartfelt toast. I spent years trying to keep people out, Pierce said as he slid the ring onto her finger. But you broke through every wall without even trying. You made me want to stay. Tessa's voice was steady. You didn't save me. I wasn't waiting for that. I came here to find myself. But in the middle of that, I found you. They kissed under the open sky, lake water lapping softly at the dock beneath them. Afterward, they danced in the grass behind the cottage, barefoot, beneath strands of fairy lights Judith had strung between 2 trees. The cake was shared off mismatched plates. Tessa's sketchbook was passed around, filled with new drawings of the boathouse, the lake at twilight, Pierce's hands. Later, as the last of the guests drifted away and the stars bloomed overhead, Pierce pulled her close beside the fire pit. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't come here? He asked. No, she whispered. Because nothing else would have felt like this. He kissed her slowly, the flames casting golden light across their skin. The lake watched quietly, the trees still, the stars endless. And for the first time in both their lives, home wasn't a place. It was a person. Years later, the Ellery cottage stood stronger than ever, its garden blooming with lavender and wild poppies. Inside, the walls were filled with art, hers and his sister's. The glass house across the lake had been softened, filled with books and warmth and life. They hosted annual lake dinners with mismatched chairs and long tables and laughter that rang through the trees. In the evenings, they sat on the dock, feet in the water, hands intertwined. They remained each other's anchor, not perfect but whole, together, always.